Hello everyone, this is Mr. Roundy, bringing you another wonderful math video. Today's topic, multiplying fractions. Get ready for the fun to begin. Okay guys, all joking aside, let's take a look at what we're actually going to be learning in today's video. By the end of the video, you should be able to do three things. You should be able to multiply fractions with whole numbers, multiply fractions with other fractions, and multiply fractions with mixed numbers. Let's go ahead and get started on our objectives. Our first objective was to learn how to multiply a fraction with a whole number. So we're going to go ahead and look at the different steps it takes to multiply a fraction with a whole number. Our first example problem is 2/3 times 4. 2/3 times 4. Well, let's take a look at the first step. Make the whole number a fraction by putting a 1 as the denominator. It's really cool that you can turn a whole number into a fraction by simply putting a 1 underneath it. Any whole number can become a fraction if you're just putting a 1 underneath it. Because really, fraction bars represent division. If I divide 4 by 1, I get the whole number 4. So I can put a 1 underneath my 4 and it becomes a fraction. 2/3 times 4/1. Now I'm ready to move on to step 2. Step 2, multiply the numerators together. So I take 2, I multiply it by 4, and I get 8. Step 3 says to multiply the denominators together. 3 times 1. And that leaves me with an improper fraction, 8/3. The final step is, if the answer is an improper fraction, to convert it to a mixed number, and then, as always, we need to make sure that our answer is in simplest form. So I quickly convert 8/3 into a mixed number. So I divide the denominator into the numerator, and that gets me 2 remainder 2, which I use that information. The 2 becomes my whole number, the remainder becomes my numerator, and my denominator stays the same. And my answer is 2 2/3. In this case, the fraction is already in simplest form. Let's go ahead and get some practice. The first problem we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and solve 2/5 times 7. So I start out by turning my whole number, 7, into a fraction by putting a fraction bar and writing a 1 underneath it. This will make my whole number into a fraction. The second step in the process is to multiply the numerators. So 2 times 7 equals 14. My next step is to multiply the denominators. 5 times 1 is 5. This leaves me with the improper fraction of 14/5. I need to first change this particular answer into a mixed number. So I divide 5 into 14, which gets me 2 remainder 4. 2 becomes my whole number, 4 becomes my numerator, 5 becomes my denominator, or stays my denominator, I should say. And I check to see if it's in simplest form. 4 and 5, they don't have any common factors but 1, and there's my answer. Let's go ahead and try one more. Let's go with 9/10 times 6. I start out by making my whole number into a fraction by putting a 1 under it, and now I multiply my numerators. 9 times 6 is 54, and 10 times 1 is 10. I convert my improper fraction into a mixed number. So 10 divided into 54 will go 5 times, with 4 left over. That gets me a mixed number of 5 4/10. But I've got to double check 4/10. That is not in simplest form. I can divide each piece of the fraction by 2 because that's a shared factor that they have. 4 divided by 2 will get me 2, and 10 divided by 2 will get me 5. I bring down my whole number 5, and my final answer is 5 2/5. Let's go back and we're going to take a look at how to multiply fractions with other fractions. So when we multiply fractions with fractions, we actually don't have to do the first step that we would with a whole number. We don't have to put a 1 underneath anything. In this particular example, 7/8 times 3/4, I'm going to start out with step 1 being multiply the numerators together. So I do 7 times 3 gets me 21. Step 2 is to multiply the denominators together. 8 times 4 gets me 32. In this case, I don't have an improper fraction, so I can just check to see if my answer needs simplified. In this case, 21 and 32 don't have any factors in common besides 1, so they're already in simplest form, and my answer is 21 over 32. Now let's go ahead and get a little practice in. Let's start out with the problem 3/4 times 1/4. So I start out by multiplying my numerators. 3 times 1 is 3. Then I move to the next step of multiplying the denominators. 4 times 4 is 16. Now I've only got to check to see if my problem needs to be simplified. 3 and 16. The only common factor that they have is 1, so they're already in simplest form, and my answer is 3/16. Let's go ahead and try one more. For this one, let's go ahead and try 5/8 times 3/10. So we're going to start out by timesing our numerators. 5 times 3 is 15. 8 times 10 is 80. In this case, I do have some common factors. The one I notice first is 5. If I divide each of these by 5, I get 3, and 80 divided by 5 is going to get me 16. 3/16. 3 and 16 have no common factors except for 1. There's our simplest form, and there's our answer. Let's go ahead now and move on to learning about how to multiply fractions and mixed numbers. In this example, 2 3/8 times 9/10, we're going to be multiplying a fraction with a mixed number. Here we have 2 3/8. So we start out at step 1 by converting the mixed numbers to improper fractions. So 8 times 2 is 16, plus 3 gets us 19 over 8 times 9/10. Step 2, multiply the numerators together. 19 times 9 gets us 171. In some cases, you may need a calculator to help you with some of the multiplication, or at least to save some time. Step 3, multiply the denominators together. 8 times 10 gets us 80. And the final step is to convert back to a mixed number and make sure the fraction is in simplest form. So I'm going to take my 171 and divide it by 80, which gets me 2 with a remainder of 11. This turns into the fraction 2 11/80. 11's prime, and so we already have it in simplest form. 2 11/80. Let's go ahead and get some practice with multiplying mixed numbers and fractions. Let's go ahead and start with 3 1/4 times 5/8. So I've got 3 times 4 gets me 12, plus 1 gets me 13 over 4 times 5/8. Now I'm going to go ahead and multiply my numerators. 13 times 5 gets me 65. 4 times 8 gets me 32. Now I've got to convert my improper fraction back into a mixed number. 32 divided into 65 will go 2 times, which gets me 64, with 1 left over. That converts to a mixed number of 2 1/32. And there's my answer. Let's go ahead and do one more. In this case, let's do 2 1/2 times 4 and 1/10. We're going to go ahead and convert both of these mixed numbers into improper fractions. 2 times 2 gets me 4, plus 1 gets me 5 over 2. 10 times 4 gets me 40, plus 1 gets me 41 over 10. We multiply these together and we get 205 on top when I multiply my numerators, 5 times 41, and when I do 2 times 10, I get 20. Now I've got to divide 20 into 205 to convert back to a mixed number. 20 goes in one time, 20, 0, bring down my 5. 20 will not go into 5, so we put a 0 up to take its place, and we have 5 left over. So I get 10 and 5/20. But I notice that I can simplify my 5/20. 5 and 20 share a common factor of 5. So I divide by 5 on each, which leaves me with 1 over 4, and I bring the 10 down with it. My final answer is 10 and 1/4. We have one final section in this lesson that we'd like to cover, and that's a way that we can simplify our fractions before we find our final answer. It's called cross-canceling. Let's take a look. One thing I should probably be clear on before we start this section is that cross-canceling is just a shortcut, a way of simplifying the problem early on so that you don't have to do it to the answer. However, some people don't like to do cross-canceling because they find it more difficult. If you find that cross-canceling is messing you up or causing you to get the wrong answer, then just ignore the cross-canceling process and go through the processes as we learned them earlier. Now, if we do cross-canceling, let's take a look at an example like 3/8 times 4/15. The first thing you want to do when you're cross-canceling is check for common factors between the numerator of the first fraction and the denominator of the second fraction. The reason it gets the name cross-canceling is because we're kind of going in a crossing pattern. I look at the 3 on this side and the 15 on this side, and they're on the diagonal from each other. They have a common factor of 3. If I divide each of these numbers by their common factor, it leaves me with 1 and 5. That's the second step, is to divide each one by its common factor. Step 3 says to repeat steps 1 and 2, but for the other diagonal, 4 and 8. 4 and 8 have a common factor of 4. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 8 divided by 4 is 2. So it's almost like we have two new fractions. We're going to take 1/2 times 1/5. If I multiply the numerators, 1 times 1 gets me 1. 2 times 5 gets me 1/10. And I have my answer in simplest form right off the bat. Let's get some practice on these. Let's look at 9/10 times 2/3. I'm going to look at the diagonals. So I look at my first diagonal, 9 and 3, and I look to see if they have any common factors. They actually do. They have a common factor of 3. So I divide each of those numbers by 3. If I divide 9 by 3, it gets me 3. If I did not divide 3 by 3, it leaves me with 1. Now I look at the other set of diagonals. 2 and 10 have a shared common factor of 2. So if I divide each by 2, I'm going to get 5, and I'm going to get 1. My new fractions now are 3/5 times 1 over 1. 3/5 times 3 times 1 will get me 3. 5 times 1 will get me 5. And there's my final answer, already in simplest form. The objectives for today's video was to be able to, by the end of the video, multiply fractions with whole numbers, with other fractions, and with mixed numbers. There was a lot we covered today, so you may want to watch this video twice just so you can get a good grasp on how to do things. I appreciate that you watched, and I hope you have a wonderful evening.